Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Ashna Agarwal. I'm a senior associate at RMI. I work on climate policy analysis, particularly at the state level. For the last few months, my team has been supporting the Colorado Greenhouse Gas Reduction Roadmap 2.0 process using the Colorado Energy Policy Simulator, which we also call EPS, and the Roadmap Baseline Scenario, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. This video is really meant to be a 10-15 minute overview of the EPS itself, the web tool, and then the roadmap baseline scenario and what went into that, so you can really understand this process. So as many of you all probably know, the Energy Policy Simulator is a tool to evaluate climate policies and really be able to visualize the impacts on cash flow, job growth, emissions, and many more output parameters. The EPS was originally developed by Energy Innovation at the country level, including for the United States. And then RMI and Energy Innovation partnered to roll out models for the 48 continental US states. And of course, this work is focused on the Colorado model. The Energy Policy Simulator is a tool that really allows users to identify what policies are needed to meet climate goals. It is a real-time model of emissions and economic impacts. It really gives unparalleled interactivity for use in a variety of settings. I think one of the most powerful aspects of the tool is that users can build scenarios by combining different policies and then measuring not just the impact of a single policy, but the cumulative impact of the policy interactions. It's also a free, public, and open source tool. It's relatively easy to use. And I think that's really important because it allows stakeholders, various folks to really get involved in this process, model your own assumptions, test different policies, and really get deep in this process. This chart is our flagship chart. This is actually for the US Energy Policy Simulator. And it just shows emissions abatement for different policies across different economic sectors between a business as usual scenario and a 1.5C degree scenario. And you can see how the user has the ability to visualize the impact of policies by sector and individual policy. So a quick overview of how the EPS actually works. First, we take energy and service demand from other models. So for the most part, we pull from the Energy Information Administration's annual energy outlook data that gives energy demand forecasts for different economic sectors. We have current and future costs and prices of things like technologies and fuels. For example, pulling data from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory on fuel cost. These two combine to give a business as usual case. And this is really the model's foundation, calculating what would happen under current macroeconomic trends. After that, we layer on, the user has the ability to layer on different policies. And when you combine a series of policies, you actually get what we call a policy scenario. Then you can compare the policy scenario to the business as usual and calculate the policy impacts. That's broadly how the EPS works. So the roadmap version of the Energy Policy Simulator has been customized for the roadmap process. It is now available on the public site. There's a few things that make this model different from the other state models. First, it's calibrated to the state's emissions inventory. So our emissions actually match the state's emissions inventory in 2020. It also includes Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, as well as major formula funded provision from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. And then the two preloaded scenarios that I want to highlight are first, the business as usual case, again, macroeconomic trends, and most state-specific policies are not included in this scenario. And then also this roadmap baseline scenario. So this is a newly built scenario by my team to really reflect the on the books Colorado state policies and those expected to be on the books by the end of 2023. I'm going to walk you through documentation that really shows what this entails and show you a few examples. That's really it for the PowerPoint portion of this. Obviously, you can pause this and use some of these links that I've put on the screen, including the models documentation, the landing page to all the state models if you want to explore around. But for now, I'm actually going to go ahead and go to the model itself. Just going to go ahead and go to Google Chrome. And if you just navigate to energypolicy.solutions/home/Colorado, you'll be able to find this tool. You could also just search Energy Policy Simulator for states in Google, it'll come up. And then you're just going to go ahead and click Enter Simulator. And when you do that, you'll actually get to this landing page. So this landing page of the tool will give emissions under business as usual. And you can explore a number of other parameters that you might be interested in pulling. So for every output graph selector, there's actually a number of other graphs that you can also select. So for example, under emissions, you can also look at emissions by sector, by different the individual sectors themselves, by pollutant, just a lot of other options. You can also look at a number of other top-line graphs. For example, electricity generation and capacity. You could look at generation or capacity or a number of other things. Another one that I like to highlight is industry CO2 emissions, total by industry. You could also look at process emissions by industry. Maybe you're only interested in energy-related emissions. Lots of different data that you could pull. I'm just going to go back to the economy-wide emissions. So all of the policy scenario design actually happens on the left-hand panel. And let's just go through a very, very simple example, and then I'll do a more complex one. So a very simple example would be, let's say we want to require 80% of electricity generation to come from clean sources by 2030. You would model that in the electricity supply sector under clean electricity standard. Here we go. And again, I said I wanted 80% by 2030. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this lever to 80%. And then remember, we want it to be fully implemented by 2030. And that's where the customized implementation schedule comes in. So you're going to click that. And right now you can see that it's 100% by 2050, meaning that we don't actually reach 80% until 2050. So let's say we want it to be 100% by 2030. You click 2030, 100%. Make sure to click this plus sign. Click OK. And you'll see the model adjust in real time. So we just made a new scenario. This is different than BAU. Let's say we want to save this. I'm going to do test demo V3. I'll go ahead and save that. It's going to take a minute to save. Now you can see how we have our own policy scenario. You can do a number of things with this policy scenario, including sharing it. If you click share, copy to clipboard, you'll actually get a link to this scenario so you can share it with your colleagues. The other thing that I want to highlight is the ability to download graph data. So essentially what this allows you to do is download any of the data that's on your panel. So say you wanted emissions by sector, you could actually download this and you'll essentially get a CSV on your computer that has emissions for every year from 2020 to 2050 by every sector. And it'll of course label the units. So if you want to do this analysis outside of this tool, you have that ability to. Next, I want to show you some of the modeling that we've done for the roadmap baseline scenario with a slightly more complex policy exercise. So let's just go to the preloaded roadmap baseline scenario. You should already have this on the public tool. It's preloaded in the tool. So let's just go back to total emissions. It's the easiest thing to look at. And we are going to go through an exercise of modeling advanced clean cars 2. So we know that Colorado is implementing advanced clean cars 2 through 2032. This policy will require a specific percentage of EV or of total vehicles sold for light duty vehicles to be zero emissions. So we can just go ahead and go to the Advanced Clean Cars website from California and look at what this should be. So we can see from this chart, that in 2032, we want 82% of vehicles sold to be zero emissions. So we want to model that in the EPS. So we're just going to go ahead and look at EV sales standard. Again, we only want this for passenger vehicles. So I'm going to deselect all of the other ones and only select passenger vehicles, cars and SUVs. And then we're going to crank this lever up. You can see that it's already cranked up to 82%. But remember, we want that to be fully implemented by 2032. So go ahead and go to Customize Implementation Schedule. You'll actually see that it is fully implemented by 2032. Now, for the previous years, for example, let's take 2031, we want this to be at 76%. So now we have to figure out, well, if we want the total EV sales to be 76% and our magnitude of our lever is set at 82%, what do we need this implementation schedule to be to actually get that 76%? And what you'll find is that you need this to be 92.7%. So if you take 92.7, multiply it by 82, you'll recover 76% for the year of 2031. That explains how you can use the implementation schedule to really match a given policy. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So that's one example of a relatively simple policy that we modeled in the roadmap baseline scenario. I also want to highlight some of the other outputs that you can look at for this scenario, including jobs growth over time. We also have public health benefits. So this is avoided death incidents per year for these different policies. So I really recommend that you all explore, check it out, look at the scenario, and see what other insights that you can pull. So just to leave us off, I also want to go over our overall roadmap baseline documentation that we're actually going to be uploading. We're going to be taking this Word doc and uploading it to a formal documentation page. So it's going to look a little bit different, but I do want to walk you through what the general format is going to be. So first, we're just going to have a description of what the roadmap baseline scenario is and what this documentation file is meant to do. For example, the roadmap baseline scenario includes policies on the books in Colorado or expected to be on the books by the end of 2023. And then you can see on the next page a table. This table is divided up by economic sector, so electricity, buildings, et cetera, et cetera. The first column will give the policy that we're modeling. And then the second column, or I guess this is overall the third column, will give you how it was modeled in the EPS. Let's just take HB 211266, which for the electricity sector requires certain utilities to reduce their emissions by 80% relative to a 2005 baseline. The way we modeled that was we used a clean electricity standard. We set it to 86% and ramped up the implementation schedule from 0 to 100% by 2030 to make sure that we match the emissions abatement expected if these utilities are fully covered by the clean energy plans. So if you just want to see this as an example, you could just go back to the roadmap baseline scenario. Let's just go back to emissions. And we can look at electricity supply, look at the clean electricity standard, and you can see that it's fully ramping up to 2030, 100% in 2030. So I really recommend that you all also read through this documentation page. It has a ton of explanation around how we model these different policies and our approach. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in. My team is really excited to work with you all on this process. And we're really excited to release this version of the tool and the roadmap baseline scenario. Talk to you later.